Hello, welcome to another TeamSense Tuesday webinar. Thank you for joining this week's Customer Spotlight featuring Yangfeng. My name is Caroline, and I'll be behind the scenes of today's webinar. But before we jump in and introduce our speakers today, let's cover a few housekeeping items. So as always, questions are encouraged throughout the webinar. We just ask that you ask them in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. But if you have anything that pops up on your mind, feel free to put it in there. And again, we'll cover it at the end. I'll be helping with that with our speakers. But that's enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Rob, who will introduce himself and our guest, Devin. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Caroline. Welcome, everybody. Our guest today for the Customer Spotlight is Devin Frosheiser. Devin is the North American Procurement Manager for Yanfeng, a world-leading automotive supplier that focuses on interior, exterior, seating, cockpit electronics, and passive safety. Devin's diverse background includes strategic roles in business, operations, procurement, and procurement leadership at companies like GM and Amazon. But at her core, Devin is a leader, and she drives measurable results and impacts across a variety of disciplines by aligning people towards strategic goals. Devin, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here and have the opportunity to kind of speak on what an amazing program TeamSense is.
Oh, we appreciate it. Well, to get us started, tell us a little bit about YF. Tell us more about the company, the size, number of locations, and give us some context there.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, YF is the leading global supplier of automotive interiors, exteriors, passive safety, cockpit electronics, what have you. The company as a whole is about 57,000 employees across more than 240 technical centers and plants in over 20 different countries. In North America alone, we're approximately 13,000 people in 23 locations. And I mean, I think that kind of just sums up the company as a whole. I think when you think of Yangfeng, for me, it's really about thinking about innovation and what comes next in the automotive industry. And one of the amazing things about working here is that the OEMs kind of turn to YF to understand what does the consumer want in the future. And so we get to be at the forefront of that technology and really what we're going to want to be driving in that the next 5 years, but the next 10, 15, 20 years down the road now.
It sounds like a really exciting place to be. I actually had the opportunity to visit one of your locations in Chattanooga, and it was really cool to see the interiors coming together.
Yeah, and that's a phenomenal team.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for you to be here because you're the first person from the procurement side of things that's joined our Customer Spotlight. So tell us a little bit about your role and your responsibilities.
Yeah, so I am on the indirect team for procurement at Yangfeng. I manage the commodities of human resources, labor services, marketing communications, sorting containment, and then quality liaisons or residents. So there's a little bit of small things in there, but those are primarily what I manage from a procurement perspective. I'm pretty much responsible for all of the contracts and the sourcing of that work across North America, primarily the US and Canada. And then I have a partner that I work with for those services in Mexico.
Okay. And how long have you been working with TeamSense?
So I engaged TeamSense here. Let's see, May. So I joined YF, interesting, on January 30th, so a little bit over a year, yay. And I was only 4 months in when I actually engaged TeamSense. It was part of an RFQ package. I had one of our facilities in Michigan reached out to me and they said, hey, like, this is a supplier that we're currently using for call off. They were going over their allowable minutes. And so they wanted to increase their package with that supplier. And before doing that, I wanted to understand, what are your needs? What are you doing? Like, is there an opportunity that we can make your lives better? And for me in procurement, that's always the key, right? How do I make my customers' lives, in this case, my customers are internal stakeholders, how do I make their lives better? And when talking with them, I discovered a very antiquated, old process for call offs. And I was like, absolutely not. Like we can do better than this. And I guess to give some context or background to that, how it used to work is an hourly would have to call off. They would call a phone number. An actual person would answer the phone number, which I think most people shake in their boots at the thought of like having to call and talk to somebody on the phone, right? And then they would record why you're calling off, and you cross your fingers that they got your name and your site correct. And then they would send a download of that information to the HR team. Some of the teams got it hourly, some of them got it once a day. And then our HR team would manually go into our timekeeping system and update timekeeping for all the call offs. And then they would have to follow up with the associate thereafter to verify, like, were you here? Were you not here? What's the reason code? Are points involved, what have you. And coming from, as you mentioned, Amazon and GM, that's very different for me. I was like, at what? Like, I'm so used to it just pops up in your timekeeping system, and you can more efficiently manpower plan. And I was like, no, we're just not accepting status quo. And so I started reaching out to companies to understand, like, what are the possibilities that we're currently missing. And that's how I came across TeamSense, honestly, on a Google search. And we were heading in a direction, I think, of primarily cost savings. And I had sent out rejection notifications, and Ramil, who I absolutely admire, we refer to him as our account rep, right? He was like, what do I need to do to get you sold on TeamSense? And I was like, listen, like, I'm sold on the product, but like, we need to have some further conversation. And he was very persistent in a positive way. I think people use that negatively sometimes, but in a very positive way. And we were sold. And then once we were sold, it was easy to sell to the team. I think when you have a high quality product, it's easy to get people behind it. And for me, TeamSense is a very high quality product.
Thank you for
Very long-winded answer.
yeah, no, it was great. Ramil is on my team and he's fantastic. We also admire Ramil.
Yeah.
You said something really interesting when you were describing sort of the previous way that things worked and it being antiquated, but you said, I think I heard you say, you cross your fingers that they get your location and the reason correct. Was that one of the primary challenges with it, was getting accurate information, or were there other challenges that came with sort of the antiquated process?
I think the biggest challenge that comes with an antiquated process is the interruption to the life. Like, yep, those are always going to be things that you have to fix in the background. And as the employee, I think you're really nervous when you're dependent on another human to make sure that your call off information is received appropriately. And I think before I answer that, for me, it was really important to understand the mindset. So when we think of call offs, it's very easy to say, like, it's a simple process, right? You call off, information shared, you're not going to be here. But it's not that easy. And it's not that easy because, at least in my experience alone, when you're calling off, it's typically correlated to a not so happy reason, right? I'm calling off because a child's sick. I'm calling off because a parent needs help. I have a flat tire. Majority of our call offs are not, I'm calling off because I'm going to go spend the weekend at the beach, right? And so when you consider that, there's a lot of emotion. It's a lot of emotion that's involved in the call off process. There's a lot of emotion that's involved in the call off process for the employee. There's a lot of emotion that's involved in the call off process for HR when the employee returns and they have to have that conversation with the employee of why they were absent and the ramifications potentially of them, not being there. And then HR has a tendency to take a brunt of that emotion, right? Because they're at the first line of it. And so when you say, like, the most difficult process of that antiquated system, I think, is the fact that it doesn't allow for the emotional complexities that are involved in calling off. Because we don't want to talk to somebody when we're in a bad mood, right? I don't want to tell somebody like my parent just died. I don't want to tell somebody my kid, got in trouble at school or they're sick. I want to be able to just have it go in and not have to deal with the human and have it as automated as I can. And then on the reverse side, for HR, it was very challenging when they would have to transcribe, right? And so for them, the frustration is the transcribing. So you're now taking all of these call offs, and at some of our sites, I think across the board, we're right now experiencing somewhere between like 100 and 150 call offs a day, across primarily like 10 or 12 locations. But when HR is having to transcribe all of those, right? And it's a very antiquated, and they know it's an old school system. And then they have an employee come up to them that's emotionally charged. That's what I think was the most challenging, is that you couldn't remove any of the negative feeling that comes around calling off that nobody really talks about.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that awareness that you have comes from a place of like really understanding and having compassion for the hourly workforce. And
Yep.
like you said, it's rare that the call off is something that's a happy moment in anyone's life, right? Whether it's me, you, or somebody that's working on the floor. Is that awareness and understanding, is that a Devin thing, or is that cultural at YF?
I think it's a combination. I like to think that I represent our culture. That's one of the things that I love about this company is the culture. And we coined this very early on when we started working with TeamSense. We said we said when we were getting the buy-in of all the various stakeholders, from the implementation phase behind the scenes to the execution and the rollout, like, you're creating an inclusive work culture, one call in at a time. And so I think that speaks to the culture more than just with me, right? Like, I think that's the HR team. That's Yangfeng.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like that message, that motto resonated and helped you align the stakeholders.
Absolutely. And again, like, when you could tell somebody, hey, like, I'm going to create a more work, I'm going to create a more inclusive work culture. I just need your buy-in. I need your support. I need your skill set, because you can do something that I can't do, right? I can find the most amazing supplier, but if HR hasn't bought into it, it doesn't matter. And when you start telling them, well, it can save you time and it can save you energy. And oh, by the way, those employees out on the floor that in a lot of our southern states, that their primary language isn't English, you can have them do their call off in Spanish. You can send a communication to them, and we use just like a little Google translator, and you can send a communication that we write in Spanish to them to be received in Spanish. For a lot of our sites in Michigan, in Southeast Michigan, we have a very heavy Arabic population. And so being able to accommodate those really seems like it's made a difference in the culture out on the floor, where people feel like they're more included, because the things that make them unique, the things that make them wonderful, are being, celebrated.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about the process of making the decision for TeamSense. In a minute here, I want to get to talking about the feedback from the field, but you're in a unique position because some of the previous guests we've had on the customer spotlight, they've been TeamSense customers for a year or more, but you're a relatively new customer. And as you mentioned, when you kind of told us a little bit about YF and the number of locations and the number of employees, it's a significant operation, and rolling out something like TeamSense is a significant lift. And so I'd love to hear just a little bit about your experience with planning for the implementation and how you prioritize that. I'm sure we've got folks that are listening or might be watching later that are thinking to themselves, oh, is it best to start small and then grow over time? Is it best to rip off the Band-Aid and do it all at once? What's been your experience?
I think every supplier change, every rollout is a little different and a little unique for many reasons. In this case, the implementation, the actual implementation on the floor, we knew was going to be the simplest part. And that's because our HR team they're experts. And I'm sorry, every HR team is experts at rolling out change, right? And if you don't think your HR team is an expert, I challenge you, because HR does one thing every single year that's absolutely mind-boggling to me, and they roll out benefits, right? Like, they mass communicate to every employee, they roll out benefits. There's typically a price increase associated with those. So people are not always the happiest, right? But they're experts at rolling out and communicating a change on a mass scale to all the employees. And so we knew, like, that's not something we have to worry about. And so our strategy was to focus on the front end and to say, as long as we can educate them to have all the information that they need, we know they can execute on the back end. And for us, that execution was to say, we're going to look holistically at the organization as a whole. I think one of the things about our TeamSense rollout, which is probably different than a lot of your others, was that we had 2 different payroll systems operating at the same time, right? We had our original payroll system, and we were in the process of transitioning to a new payroll system. And so when we first launched TeamSense, we had 4 sites on the new system, the remaining on the old, and we're actually still in the transitioning phase. And so what we decided to do is we said, hey, we're going to focus on the first 4 on the new system, because we're going to do a full integration. And we're going to utilize TeamSense to its full capabilities, so that when our supervisors log in at the beginning of their day, they're able to see who called off where. They can manpower plan, they can understand about employee sharing, because they know what sites have headcount, what sites don't have headcount. And that's where we really focused on. But the execution was saying, we need to get the right people involved. And frankly, that wasn't me from procurement. I just brought all the parties in. So I brought our IT team with your IT team, and it was flawless after that. I like to say that like, everything that TeamSense does, particularly Josh on your guys' team and our IT team, it's kind of magic that happens in the background. But it was easy. We did the first 4 sites very seamlessly, and then we had rolled out technically all the data at the same time, but we waited to do the next grouping of sites all at the same time. The actual rollout was very easy. The challenging part was making sure that we sent the right data to TeamSense, and that TeamSense knew what data we wanted to see and how we wanted to see it. But from an execution standpoint, I don't think any execution is flawless, but I would like to say, like, this is about as close to flawless as one can get. And it wasn't painful, which is exciting for me. Because when you're telling somebody, like, our HR team, they had a lot of changes all at once, right? So we gave them a new payroll system, or they're going into a new payroll system, and you're getting a new call-off system, and you're getting all of these things at the same time. That should tell you that it was pretty easy, because they were able to absorb and accept it really, really quickly.
That's great to hear. Sounds like we hit the mark there.
Absolutely.
Most critically, though, how was the feedback from the folks on the floor, the folks that were actually using it? What was that like for them?
You know what? It's been, from what I've heard, an overwhelmingly positive feedback, because people don't have to call anybody. Like, nowadays, like, what do they call them? Like, the new generation. They don't want to call a single person ever. They don't want to talk on the phone. They don't talk on the phone. Like, everything is on a social media or a text message, and we've gotten away from minutes, and we're a data-driven, in terms of technology, like a data-driven communication society. And so they love the fact that they can text in, and they don't have to ever speak to anybody. But we do have a group of older folks. There are some even have a flip phone, where they're like, I don't text message, or, they'd have to press the key like 3 times to get a letter out. They like the fact that they call in and it's automated and it recognizes them by their employee ID. And once they've called in once, even if they've changed their phone number, they quickly update it and it just continues to recognize them. We've also had feedback that it is very nice that they can call in from different phone numbers and still be recognized by their employee ID.
On a previous customer spotlight, one of our customers mentioned that aspect in particular. And if I remember correctly, she said that it was, not just a great experience for the hourly workforce, that they can be recognized, they can identify themselves very easily, over the phone or via text, but then also that process of updating the phone number through the call off ensures that the company has the best, most updated contact information. Is that a benefit to YF? What does it give you to know that you've got, verified contact information for all of the hourly workforce?
So when we went into this, the intent was to find a call off supplier, right? We didn't go into it thinking like we need to be able to mass communicate with our employees. We had at the time another supplier that provided those services for us. But what we found is, particularly as we've gotten through some of this tough Michigan weather, we've been able to send communications out to the team about the sites being open, or for some of our sites that are heavy in just-in-time deliveries, we're able to communicate to our temps of like, hey, like we don't need you today, or we can ask for volunteers for over and under coverage, open enrollment. The team pushed heavy communications out to the workforce for open enrollment, just so that we could ensure we were engaging as many people as we possibly could. So it was a massive added benefit that we originally weren't planning on, but the team absolutely loves. And I think if you go into our communication, into the communication tab in the platform, you'll see like the sites are constantly communicating in some capacity. I think for me, what I was really excited about, thinking back to my times as a supervisor, when I would have, a 1 million+ square foot warehouse and, a couple employees, it's very hard during the shift to find people sometimes, right? Like it's just hard, like, and they're moving, they're on foot or they're on mobile equipment. And when you're covering such a vast amount of space, it's really easy to miss each other. And I'm like, how nice it would be, like, if you could send a communication to somebody and say like, hey, come see me, after lunch or after break or at the start of shift tomorrow. Because, for various reasons on why you would need that. But it certainly makes it a lot easier to have that type of communication with your employees.
Oh yeah, for sure. You've mentioned a couple of different benefits, an easier process for the hourly workforce to call off that they enjoy more, the ability of your supervisors to, have an awareness and see what's happening on a shift and be able to adapt in real time. I know that it's been a short time. You've only been a customer for a short time, but have you seen any measurable impacts from rolling TeamSense out?
I think it's really too early for us to understand like what those measurable impacts truly are in terms of like metric driven impacts. I can say for us right now, the true benefit is the intangibles that are really hard for us to quantify. And those are the things that I talked to previously, which is the quality of life improvement, right? Our HR team, instead of having to spend an excessive amount of time sitting focused on data entry for call-offs, which is a very reactive process, they now can be reactive, which means we can focus on engagement. We can focus, how do we engage our employees, which is one of the real driving purposes of HR. How do we engage our employees to come to work the next day, right? How do we encourage them to be here? How do we create the culture that we want to create, which is very challenging to do when you're focused on the back end, being reactive, just doing the day-to-day, nuances that are involved with the job. So I think that is a very, it's a really big swing, but it's hard to measure metrically what the impact of that has been. And I think the other way is the actual improved quality of life for the associates that are using the call-off system. We haven't gone so far to really engage them yet. We want to give them enough time to really get into it. But the feedback that we've gotten thus far has been very positive. Again, nobody wants to talk to somebody. Like, as automated as we can be, the better, with respect to that being a very high emotional time.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like the ability of your HR team to be more proactive, less reactive, spend more time on engagement. I'm guessing you would expect that to manifest itself in things like better attendance or maybe even better retention. Or are there any other ways that you hope or expect that it would manifest itself?
Yeah, obviously better retention, better attendance. I think other ways that we're hoping it manifests itself is, and not necessarily with HR, but more with the ops team, is an ability for improved manpower planning. That is a huge thing that with the previous supplier, we didn't have the ability to do. So if I don't know 5 of my team are going to be off before I start my shift, I can't ask anybody to stay over. I can't ask if I can share from another division on the floor. I can't call people to come in early, none of those things. So I think for them, it's the ability to be able to manpower plan that's really improved. And I think when you have better manpower planning, there's less frustration, right? It all is a very much a trickle down effect. And the other thing that we're hoping to see in the future here is utilizing that communication tool for engagement purposes, for fun purposes, right? So it was one of our Michigan locations that was going to use it for a like candy jar guess game, right? So like write in, write in what you think, like how many pieces of candy are in the jar, and the closest person wins XYZ. But just engaging them in fun ways, that's very different than how we would typically just force communication.
Yeah, what a great way to use it, to get that information out and make sure that everybody gets to be involved.
Yeah.
One last TeamSense related question. Going through the process of deciding on TeamSense and then planning the implementation and now implementing things. Has there been a time where TeamSense distinguished itself among other vendors that you've worked with, or a particular time when you were grateful for something at TeamSense?
I think one of the things for me that distinguished TeamSense from the very beginning, and is part of the reason why they won the business, was I'm a very big proponent and I'm very focused on relationships and earning trust. And I think that you can do all these things wonderfully, but if you don't earn trust, if you don't have quality relationships, things just have a tendency to fall apart or to never really realize the way that they possibly could. And TeamSense really embodies that. There has been plenty of times where I have had to push or lean into TeamSense because I'm like, I am not an expert, but this is a concern that my team has. And if this is a concern that my team has, this is a concern that I have. And I need this fixed because this is important to my team. And I've been able to trust that it's going to be done. Even if I'm out for personal reasons and it's like, hey, I don't have the ability to even read this email. Can you look at it and address this concern? And I know that, Sarah or Emil or, whomever is, Josh, it doesn't matter. They'll take care of it, right? Like that brain trust is going to make sure that whatever the issue is, right, it gets resolved, and it gets resolved quickly. And if we don't have an answer very quickly to resolve it, it is communication after communication of like, here's the steps that we're taking. Here's an update. Here's the next steps that we're taking. Is this sufficient? Do you need more? And never being complacent. So for me, I think that trustworthiness in a team that has truly bought into their product is what makes TeamSense stand out.
We, you mentioned Josh and Sarah and Ramil and many others here at TeamSense are big supporters of yours and YF, and we have loved getting to know you in the organization and what a cool, innovative place that you work. For folks that might be listening or watching this later that might be looking for their next role, let me give you the opportunity to put a plug in for Yanfeng. What makes it special? Why should someone consider Yanfeng for the next move in their career?
You know, I think what makes us special is this one, like, kind of YF strategy that we have, which really means that we are the only automotive global supplier, the only one that can fully integrate interior and exterior with passive safety. We are the supplier that the OEMs are turning to say, what are our customers going to want tomorrow? And when you work at YF, you get to see some of these innovations. You know, we were mentioned, there's all kinds of mentions from the CES show in Las Vegas last month. And to me, that's what makes working here so wonderful. You are at the forefront of innovation and what tomorrow is going to be. And having that ability to be part of that, I think is extremely exciting. You know, there's very few industries that we work in where I feel like you can impact as many people's lives as you can in the automotive industry. And I used to say, when I was a supervisor, I would tell people, you know, doctors, they save a couple of lives maybe a day, right? They can only see so many people a day, but you produce how many doors a day? You produce how many instrument panels a day? You produce how many seats a day, right? Like, you provide people the ability to get from point A to point B. You're the reason why they're able to obtain their livelihood. You're the reason why their kids get to go to school. You're the reason why they get to go to the doctor. You have a greater impact on people's lives than I think most realize in this industry. And so I think to be on the forefront of that innovation, to be able to participate that is an amazing feeling. And I think when you couple that with a wonderful culture, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. Which probably sounds super corny. I realize it. But it's true. It's true. I don't know if I've ever been happier in a workplace. And that's not to say anything negative about my previous careers, because I've been very grateful and I love all of them for various reasons. But we end up where we end up for a reason.
Well said. Well said. And as someone who has personally benefited from passive safety systems, I will say that is very inspiring. What a rewarding place to work, and very grateful for the work that you and your colleagues do.
Thank you.
Caroline, I see Q&A coming in, so let's transition to a little Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. And Devin, such a great testimony. And thank you so much for sharing that. Really inspiring. So thanks again. But before we jump into Q&A, I would love to share a little bit more around our plans for next week's webinar. So again, we do these every Tuesday. You can remember TeamSense Tuesdays. So next week, we'll be doing a little bit of pointers on points, practices for attendance points policies. So you'll get some insights from Allison and Sharon. They're the experts in this part of attendance tracking. And so excited to talk more about some of the trends that they're seeing in the industry and how TeamSense really helps industries with their attendance point policies. So let's go ahead and jump into Q&A. So I do see it popping off pretty strong, like you mentioned. We have one question in particular from Brittany. Could you talk a little bit more about the integration with your HRIS and payroll system?
Yeah, so that was, and again, primarily driven by IT. So what we did is we partnered literally on a couple calls, Yangfeng IT with our payroll IT team and TeamSense IT team. And after a few calls, they had it completely resolved, or I shouldn't say resolved, but they had it all figured out. And so our team decided what information that we needed to pull, what was the frequency in which we were pulling information to send it to TeamSense. TeamSense was able to absorb it, reformat it, and then they upload it into their dashboard and then fully integrate into our payroll system. And when our supervisors log into payroll, it actually shows a note that says, TeamSense call off. And when they hover over that TeamSense call off, it will say whether they're absent or they're going to be late. Or in some cases, depending on the nuances of each site, because our actual, we call it like a decision tree for call off, is different at each site based on the site preferences and or needs. It could say like bereavement or jury duty. There's numerous different things. But that actual integration piece, I sat on all the calls, Brittany, but frankly, I don't know. It's all magical. It just happens. It was very quick and it was very easy. And they talked to each other and I sat there and smiled and was like, okay, so to recap, like, this is going to work. They're like, yep, it's going to work. I said, okay, let's go. And then we would run a test and you could see it working. And from there, we just executed. We just rolled it out. So I hope that answers your question. I'm sure you probably wanted something more detailed into the actual like API or SFT integration, but I don't know the nuances and I'm impressed I even know those words. So there you go.
Appreciate it. Okay, we do have a few more. Again, we'll try to get to everybody's questions as best as we can. So one question that popped up, it said that, man, the call-off system sounds awful. We're actually going through the same issue. What have Yangfeng employees tell you about their experience after they switched to TeamSense? Have they made in particular comments about their experience ever since the switch?
Yeah, just that it's so much easier. They're like, I love that they absolutely love the text messaging. The population that prefers to call in, they're going from a live person to an automated. So they do make positive comments about it there, but I feel like the real impact is with the hourly being able to just send a text message, I'm going to be absent or I'm going to be late. And even if they misspell it, the program still recognizes what they're trying to say. And they go in and they fill out the survey and it's very quick and it's very easy. And so for them, that ability to not have to talk to, they're like, I just hate talking to somebody, is huge. We've also received a lot of positive feedback that the survey is in languages other than English. For our employees, that was absolutely huge. That was something that we were not very inclusive before, because when they would have to use the call off and they called and they spoke to somebody, it was somebody that spoke English. Mm-hmm. So if they didn't speak English, they would have to hand it, the phone to somebody else to communicate that they weren't going to be there.
That's obviously a huge roadblock. So that's fantastic feedback to hear that. Before we jump into our next question, I went ahead and just move over to the next slide. So if you do have interest in getting in touch with an expert or booking a demo, these would be the perfect resources for you. You can always join our website. It's really easy to navigate. Follow us on social. And then, of course, if you register for this webinar, you'll automatically get an email invite to next week's webinar too. But I want to jump into another question that came from the audience to Devin. So you mentioned that OEM turns to Yangfeng for insights into what the customer wants. They're curious about how y'all stay so close to the customer.
I am not on the innovation team, so I do not want to misspeak to that. But I will say we have a phenomenal team that is dedicated specifically to innovation. It is a rapidly growing team. And I think there's various different methods and ways that we stay connected to the customer. But I think the biggest way in part of innovation is understanding and listening to what customers want without them knowing what they actually want, right? And I think when we think historically of things that were invented that have taken off, right? We didn't even know we wanted these things or needed these things until somebody presented them to us, right? Like nobody was like, I need a computer. Somebody had the foresight to think, like, if I develop this this device that can do programming or mathematics, I could make people's lives easier or better or improve them. And I think that's what our team is focused on, is how do we improve the lives of people by trying to think ahead.
Absolutely, having that predictability. Absolutely can see that. Okay, we have time for one final question. So this person has said, I'm inspired by your vision for your role as procurement and making lives of the employees better. I don't always feel the same sentiment from my procurement partner. Any advice on how I can get them to think in that way?
This is what I would say, and I would say for yourself and for your partner. Procurement is typically not the department or the unit or the organization within a company that people turn to or want to be part of. And I think for me, that's part of the reason why I love the culture at YF, because they understand the importance of procurement. But very early on in my career, somebody had told me something along the following. It doesn't matter if you make a widget, if you make a car, if you provide a service. It doesn't matter if those are janitorial services. It doesn't matter if you're boxing cereal. Whatever product or service you're providing or developing or creating, they all have one thing in common. They can be 100% efficient. They can produce zero scrap. They can have the best ratings that ever existed. But if you don't have good supplier relationships, if you haven't built trust with your suppliers, if you don't have well negotiated and fair and even contracts on both sides, if your contracts at the very beginning are not cost competitive, none of that other stuff matters, because you can't make a profit. And so you can be as innovative as you want, but if you can't buy those materials and or those services with the means of being cost competitive and having strong relationships and finding suppliers that are stable and secure enough to last with you and through challenges and trials and tribulations, again, you're not going to be successful. You're not going to turn a profit. And I think for YF, they really embody that, and they embed procurement as a key and critical part of all aspects of the organization. And so to you, I would challenge you to empower your procurement team and say, like, I need you to be successful. And I say the same thing to my HR or to my quality teams, right? Like, I can find you the most cost competitive contract. But particularly when it comes to services outside, we're not talking direct procurement, but indirect procurement, when we're providing services, if they don't buy into it, nothing that I do matters, right? If they're not bought into TeamSense, they're not going to use it. It's not going to get rolled out. Employees aren't going to be happy. We're not going to have communications, and everything just starts to fall apart. So I think it's really understanding that every aspect of a company is extremely important, whether we realize it or not. It wouldn't exist if it wasn't.
Beautifully stated.
Real quick before we close, Caroline, Devin, would it be okay if folks that are attending connect with you on LinkedIn?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
That was another question that came in. Awesome. Well, guys, we are right at time. And Devin, this was so insightful, and we really appreciate your time sharing your experience using TeamSense. This was just so fantastic to hear. And Rob, thanks so much again for your time. Appreciate you leading the discussion.
All right, folks, see you next time. Thank you so much, Devin.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a good one.